Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. And going back to that Dick Act for a second, I'm going to read up on that. Glad to get information on that. But there is no possible way for one Congress to bind the actions of a subsequent Congress. You can't pass a law that is unrepealable. You just can't do it. Each Congress has the opportunity to pass fresh legislation. They can go back and revoke and repeal anything that's been passed by a prior Congress. The only thing that is not repealable by Congress is the Constitution. That's what stands. That's why the Second Amendment is far more important than the Dick Act of 1902, as good a piece of legislation as that might happen to be. Now, Karl Rove is getting in hot water. Karl Rove has launched open warfare against you and me. Karl Rove and the blue blood Republicans, the Brooks Brothers Republicans, the ruling class Republicans, the elite Republicans, they have declared open warfare on you and me. They are going after the Tea Party. They want to take control of the electoral process, beginning with the primaries. They want to make sure that we never have a candidate like Todd Aiken or Richard Murdoch again, completely oblivious. They don't want us to understand that you had moderate Republicans that got slaughtered in Montana. They got slaughtered in New Hampshire and other places like that. I mean, there were more moderate Republicans that lost in 2012 than conservative Republicans that lost. But they don't want you to know about that. They don't want you to think about that. They want you to think that the whole thing was about guys like Todd Aiken and Richard Murdoch, which were fine candidates. They were genuine conservative candidates. If the Republicans had come to their aid instead of dumping them overboard like they did, they easily could have won those races. They got abandoned on the field of battle by guys like the Karl Roves. I mean, one of the reasons they lost is that the Republican leadership turned on them. Remember, Reince Priebus, head of the GOP, we're not going to give that Todd Aiken a single penny. He could be tied. And he didn't say we're not going to give him $1, we're not going to give him a dime. He said we're not going to give him a single solitary penny. That's how vengeful the ruling class Republicans were. And they were the ones that, you abandon a guy when he needs you the most. I mean, that's the time to come to the guy's aid. So anyway, Karl Rove is getting some real heat. And now he's trying to make like, oh, no, I'm the biggest Tea Party guy you ever met. He's talking here last night on what program? This is on Sean Hannity's program. And here's what Karl Rove had to say, trying to dig himself out of this ditch.
I want to be clear about this. Crossroads is second to none in our support of Tea Party candidates.
Barf.
Our object is not to be for the establishment, it's to be
Barf.
for the most conservative candidate who could win.
Barf.
And if we were involved in 2009 and 10 in primaries, I would suspect that we would have been involved on behalf of Marco Rubio because he was the most conservative candidate who could win.
Barf.
This is not Tea Party versus establishment.
Barf. It's just nauseating to me. And the problem is, the ruling class Republicans, like Karl Rove, did not support Marco Rubio. They were all for Charlie Crist. They wanted Charlie Crist. Marco Rubio was the Todd Aiken of 2010. The ruling class Republicans did not support him. So Karl Rove is just talking through his hat when he says they would have been on board with Marco Rubio. Now, they had some immigration hearings yesterday, and here is the head of ICE talking about the fact that they have no confidence in the current administration when it comes to the enforcement of current immigration law, let alone what might be coming down the pike. You talk about immigration laws that we have on the books right now, and this guy's saying, look, this administration is actually getting in our way in trying to enforce the immigration laws that we've got on the books today. Let's listen.
A lot of this debate is centered around the idea of obviously focusing on 11 million people who are not legal and then legalizing them, and then we will provide these enforcement measures. Some people say we should have a trigger before the legality, and I guess just based on your experience, I mean, a guy like me who's considering this stuff, how much confidence should I have, based on your experience, that the enforcement mechanisms that are promised by people advocating this legislation and by Congress will actually end up coming to fruition? Because it just seems like, we talk about certain enforcement since '86, and now we're promising certain things. Obviously, the executive has a certain amount of discretion whether they can enforce the law. So what advice would you give me about whether I should believe that we're going to finally start enforcing the law?
It's funny you asked me that question, sir, because I'm actually going to be up here next week, and I intended to come up and ask you folks, how do you put something into our legislation that will guarantee that we're actually going to be able to enforce the laws? Because, I mean, you're talking to somebody right now that we filed a lawsuit to try to be able to do our job. So my confidence level right now, at least with the administration, is zero that we're going to be able to do our jobs now or in the future.
So he says, look, I got absolutely zero confidence that we're going to be able to do our jobs. We've had to go to court in order to get the freedom to do our jobs, to actually enforce current immigration law. And see, that's what makes this Rubio amnesty thing such a joke, because he's saying, oh, we got to have the triggers in there. We don't have the triggers in there. We're not going for this amnesty thing. There's no way to get those triggers actually deployed, because the Obama administration has no interest in enforcing immigration law. Doesn't matter how good it is. Doesn't matter whether the Democrats write it or whether the Republicans write it. He's got zero interest in enforcing immigration law. And you got major morale problems. Earlier, this is Chris Crane who was giving testimony. He's with the National Immigration Customs Enforcement Council 118. And he said, look, morale right now with ICE, this is the Immigration Customs Enforcement, they rank 279 out of 291 federal agencies. There's only 12 agencies that have lower morale or job satisfaction than ICE does, because their hands are being tied by the administration. And he said this is a quote from his earlier testimony: most Americans would be surprised to know that immigration agents are regularly prohibited from enforcing the two most fundamental sections of the United States immigration law. According to ICE policy, in most cases, listen to this, agents can no longer arrest persons solely for entering the United States illegally. You can't even arrest them coming across the border. You catch them taking their first step on American soil, and Obama will not let you arrest them. So we have de facto amnesty right now. Additionally, in most cases, immigration agents cannot arrest persons solely because they have entered the United States with a visa and then overstayed that visa or failed to return to their country. So the two ways that people get to the United States is they either come in illegally. Obama says you can't arrest them for that. They're breaking the law. You can even watch them do it, but you can't arrest them. The other way they get into the country is they come here on a legal visa and they overstay, which means they're breaking the law at that point. And Obama says you can't arrest them for that. So the two most fundamental responsibilities that immigration law enforcement has to arrest people that have entered the country illegally or overstayed visa, Obama said you can't arrest them. That's what makes this whole business about these immigration triggers just an absolute farce. Now, I got a piece here by John O'Sullivan, and I'm actually going to they have to take the rest of the time to walk through this, so we're not going to have time for any more phone calls. But this is a very, very important piece by John O'Sullivan talking about the electoral disaster that this Rubio amnesty plan would represent. And he says, look, I'm concerned, and I'm concerned primarily about good public policy. I'm not concerned about whether it benefits Democrats or Republicans. I just want good immigration policy that's good for America. And that's where John O'Sullivan's coming from. But he says, look, if you take a look at this purely from a political standpoint, set aside what's best for America. Let's just talk about Democrats and Republicans. This, he says, would be an absolute disaster for the Republican Party. This is a quote, the single most direct primary and unavoidable effect of declaring an amnesty, which is what Marco Rubio wants to do, for the estimated 12 million illegal immigrants already in the United States would be a net 2.2 million extra votes for the Democrats. So if we do the Rubio amnesty plan, because these triggers that he's talking about, they're never going to be implemented, not a single chance they're going to be implemented. So it's total smoke and mirrors to think there's any meaningful triggers that could be a part of any legislation. And John O'Sullivan says, look, the net effect is 2.2 million extra votes for the Democrats. That's at a minimum. He says there might be more, but there could not possibly be fewer than 2.2 million Democrat votes. So what that means is if this is going to kill you, you got to find a way to offset the 2.2 million votes. How do you get them? And he says, well, you can't. They're just not there because Hispanic immigrants are Democrats by nature. And what he says here, he points out that in 1986, Ronald Reagan signed the amnesty bill in 1986. You'd think, okay, here's a Republican. He does amnesty. It's going to be good for the next Republican candidate. Not so. George Bush got 30% of the Latino vote in 1988. So Ronald Reagan legalizes 3 million illegals. You'd think, oh, that's terrific. Out of gratitude, to vote Republican. Not so. Only 30% voted for George H.W. Bush in 1988. Now, and he goes through some other stuff. Maybe I can come back to this tomorrow. But the reality is that if you take a pro-amnesty position as a Republican, they have discovered it actually costs you votes. Because you get some Hispanic votes maybe, but it costs you support from your base. In other words, it hurts you more than it helps you. And this is what he says. Again, this is a quote. Poll after poll shows that Hispanics vote Democratic not because of amnesty, but because they generally support liberal economic policies. They're Democrats. That's why they vote Democratic, because they're Democrats. Doesn't matter how many of them you amnesty, they're going to vote Democrat. Pew Research Center reported that just 32% of Hispanics have a positive view of capitalism. That's what the Republican Party is all about. It's about capitalism. 1 out of 3 Hispanics support. You're not going to get their votes. So amnesty, this guy is saying, would be a suicide pact for the Republican Party, and I agree with him. Let's close the program with this. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. See you tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of American Family Association,